was a quiet, sunny morning. The streets were calm, and the birds chirped softly in the distance. People walked in and out of a small grocery store at the corner of Lincoln Avenue. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. A black car slowly pulled into the parking lot. It was a clean, black SUV, polished, expensive, but not flashy. The man who stepped out of it looked sharp. He wore a dark suit, neat shoes, and sunglasses. He stood tall and moved with quiet confidence. People noticed him, but not because he was loud, because he carried himself like someone important. He walked toward the store, holding a small list in his hand. Just groceries, milk, eggs, bread. He was planning to cook breakfast for his sister, who had just come out of the hospital. That was all. A simple morning, a kind gesture. But before he could even reach the door, the sound of police sirens broke the peace. 2 squad cars pulled in fast. Their tires squealed. 4 officers jumped out, hands on guns, shouting, hands where I can see them. Get down now! Don't move! The man froze, confused. What's going on? He asked calmly. But they didn't listen. Down! On the ground now. One officer screamed again. The man slowly raised his hands. He didn't argue. He didn't run. He placed his keys and phone gently on the hood of his car and then knelt on the pavement. One officer rushed forward, shoved him flat, and cuffed his hands behind his back. People around the parking lot stopped and stared. A few pulled out their phones. Cameras started recording. What did he do? One woman asked. Why are they arresting him? Someone else whispered. The man remained quiet, even as the rough hands pressed him to the ground. His sunglasses were knocked off. His face hit the pavement. Still, he didn't shout or fight. One of the officers, a man in his early 30s, sneered. What are you doing in a car like that, huh? Stolen? The man turned his head slightly and said with a calm voice, You're making a mistake. Big one. The officer laughed. Sure I am. Another officer picked up the man's phone. He looked at it and frowned. There's no lock screen. He scrolled quickly, then stopped. The phone had only one number pinned on speed dial. A contact that said only, Command, direct. He laughed nervously and showed it to his partner. What kind of joke is this? The man, still lying on the ground, repeated, You're making a big mistake. The officer raised the phone, as if pretending to dial. Let's see who picks up. He pressed the button. It rang once, then connected. A cold, clear voice came through the speaker. Confirm status. The officer blinked. Hello? Confirm. Status. Code required. The voice repeated, this time louder, sharper. The officer stared at the phone. Who is this? There was a pause. Then the voice changed. This time it sounded angry, robotic, trained. You are not cleared. Identify yourself. Now. The officer quickly ended the call. His face turned pale. He looked down at the man on the ground. The man simply raised one eyebrow. You should have listened, he said quietly. More bystanders were filming now. A young man in a hoodie whispered to his friend. That guy's somebody. You can just tell. One officer pulled the arresting cop aside. We better check who this guy is before we screw this up. The original officer rolled his eyes. Please. He's just putting on a show. That number probably goes to some prank hotline. But something about the man's eyes, something about how still he was, it made others nervous. Inside the station, the arrest was already being logged. But just as the officer typed the man's name into the system, the screen flashed, access restricted, clearance required. That had never happened before. Back in the parking lot, the man slowly turned his head toward the crowd. He didn't shout, he didn't beg. He just looked around, at the people filming, at the children staring in confusion, and then back at the officers. Then he closed his eyes and whispered one word, initiate. The phone in the officer's hand buzzed again. The screen lit up. Incoming call, United States Department of Defense. He didn't answer. He couldn't move. He just stood there, frozen, with the phone shaking in his hand. The man on the ground slowly smiled, cut to silence. The parking lot was now quiet but tense. The man was still on the ground, cuffed. The officers were frozen, unsure what to do. That one phone call had changed everything. Officer Ramirez, the youngest of the group, looked pale. He leaned toward his partner and whispered, "We need to let him go. Right now." But Sergeant Harlan, the one who had led the arrest, was stubborn. "He's bluffing. We don't take orders from some fake number." Then the phone buzzed again. Incoming call, Department of Defense. Ramirez's hands shook. "That's the Pentagon. That's the real number." Sergeant Harlan took the phone and angrily pressed decline. That was his second mistake. Suddenly, all four officers' radios buzzed at once. A voice came through, loud, serious, commanding. "This is General Morris, Joint Chiefs of Staff. Officers at Lincoln Avenue, stand down immediately. Do not touch the detainee. He is not under arrest. I repeat, he is not under arrest." The officers looked at each other in shock. People in the crowd gasped. One woman said, "Did he say General?" The man on the ground was silent, waiting. Sergeant Harlan still hesitated. Anyone can fake a radio call. But then all their body cams blinked red, disconnected. Their phones lost signal. The police car computers restarted. And then another car arrived. Not a squad car. A black vehicle with no plates, tinted windows, and a small U.S. flag sticker on the side. Two men in suits stepped out. Dark suits, earpieces, cold expressions. They didn't shout. They didn't run. One of them walked calmly toward the officers and said just one sentence. "You need to uncuff the general. Now." The officers didn't move. The man repeated himself, slower this time. "Uncuff the general." Ramirez stepped forward, reached for the cuffs and unlocked them. His hands trembled. The man on the ground, General Marcus Reed, slowly stood up. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just dusted off his jacket, picked up his sunglasses from the ground, and placed them on calmly. Then he looked directly at Sergeant Harlan. "I gave you a chance," he said softly. 3 times. Sergeant Harlan opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. General Reed turned to the man in the suit. "Status?" The suited agent gave a quick nod. "Footage has been collected. Internal Affairs is on the way. Their badges are being reviewed as we speak." The crowd watched in silence. Phones were still recording, but no one made a sound. It was like watching a live movie, except it was real. A child whispered to his mother, "Is he a superhero?" The mother just nodded. General Reed walked back to his car. His phone buzzed again. He looked at the screen and gave a quiet sigh. Then, he turned around and looked at the crowd. "My name is Marcus Reed," he said. "Major General, U.S. Army. I served this country for 29 years. I've led men into combat. I've buried friends. And this morning I was treated like a criminal because of how I look." He paused. "I could have made one call the moment they touched me, but I waited, because I wanted to see how far it would go. I wanted to give them a chance." He glanced at the officers. "They failed that chance." The people in the crowd began to clap, not loudly, but slowly, with respect. Sergeant Harlan stared at the ground. One of the suited agents walked toward the officers and handed each of them a sealed envelope. Inside, suspension notices, effective immediately. General Reed got in his car. Before he closed the door, he said one last thing to the officer who had held his phone. "You thought I was no one, but today you learned. Some men don't need to shout to be dangerous." The car pulled away. Back at the station, alarms were going off. Inside a secured office, a computer screen displayed bold red letters. "Incident logged. Clearance level, top secret. Investigation commencing." In another part of the country, the President's daily security report had just been updated, with General Marcus Reed's name at the top, because this wasn't just about race, or power, or uniforms. This was about a warning, and the people who had made the mistake were about to feel the full weight of it. The halls of the Pentagon were never quiet, but this morning, something was different. Phones were ringing nonstop. High-ranking officers were rushing from room to room. And deep inside a secured command center, a team of military lawyers, intelligence analysts, and generals sat around a long table. Every eye fixed on one name flashing across the screen: General Marcus Elijah Reed. A man in a gray suit stood up. His voice was calm but serious. General Reed was detained yesterday by local police without cause. He was not in uniform, but his ID was found in his car. Officers failed to verify it. They also refused to follow proper protocol after he identified himself. Across the table, General Morris, the one who had ordered the officers to stand down, leaned forward. He gave them 3 warnings, Morris said. They ignored all of them. Another official frowned. Why didn't he stop them sooner? A colonel cleared his throat. Because he wanted the truth caught on camera. Not just by law enforcement, but by the public. He wanted people to see what happens when power is misused. The room went silent for a moment. Someone pressed a button. A large screen lit up, showing footage from multiple cell phones and body cams. They watched as General Reed calmly obeyed orders. How he was shoved, cuffed, mocked. Then came the call. Confirm status. The voice still gave chills. Then the black car. The agents, the fear in the officers' eyes. Everything. When the clip ended, no one spoke for a moment. Finally, a soft voice from the back of the room broke the silence. We trained him to lead armies, and yet he handled this with more control than any of us expected. Meanwhile, in a small house 2 hours from the city, Marcus sat at his sister's kitchen table. The smell of eggs and toast filled the air. But he wasn't eating. He stared at his coffee, deep in thought. His sister, Marlene, placed a plate in front of him and sat across the table. "You did the right thing," she said gently. "I let it happen," he said. "I let them put me on the ground." "You didn't let them," she replied. "You trusted the world to see the truth." And it did. Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. "I could have ended it with 1 word. But then no one would believe." "It happens," she said. "Now they can't deny it." He nodded. Then his phone buzzed. "Secure line, Pentagon." He stepped outside to answer. The voice on the other end was cold and professional. "Sir, you're being summoned to D.C., the secretary. Wants a full debriefing. Cameras will be there. They want your side, on record." Marcus looked out across the quiet street. "No more silence, huh?" he said quietly. "No, sir," the voice replied. "The world is watching now." Back at the police station, things were falling apart. The video had gone viral, 12 million views in one night. People weren't just angry. They were demanding answers. 3 officers had been suspended. Sergeant Harlan was under federal investigation. The chief of police gave a press conference, but it only made things worse. "We had no idea who he was," he said nervously. The officers followed standard procedure. But the reporters weren't buying it. One reporter shouted, "If he had been white and wearing a suit, would you have thrown him on the ground?" The chief didn't answer. Later that night, Marcus arrived in D.C. He wore his full uniform, medals shining across his chest, polished boots, shoulders straight. The building he walked into was filled with reporters, cameras, lights. But Marcus walked through it all like a shadow. He wasn't there for show, he was there for justice. He entered a large briefing room. The Secretary of Defense waited inside, along with top leaders from every branch of the military. The secretary stood up. "General Reed," he said, "on behalf of the United States government, I apologize for what happened to you." Marcus looked him in the eye. "With respect, sir, this isn't about me. It's about what happens every day to people who can't make that phone call." The room was quiet. He continued, "The difference between me and the man who gets stopped on the street for nothing? I have stars on my shoulder and a number that reaches the Pentagon." He paused. "But most don't, and they still bleed the same." The secretary nodded. "So what would you have us do?" Marcus looked around the room. His voice was firm. "Change starts at the top. Reform, accountability, retraining. You already know what needs to happen. You just need the will to do it." He placed a file on the table, an internal policy draft he'd written 3 years ago and submitted. But it was ignored, until now. As he left the building, a reporter ran up to him. "General Reed, what do you say to people who see you as a hero?" He stopped. "I say I shouldn't have to be a general to be treated like a human being." Then he got into the car and drove away. But the world didn't forget. The sun rose over a divided country. On one side were those praising General Marcus Reed for his calm strength. On the other, anger, denial, and fear. Social media was burning with opinions, videos, and hashtags. Some called him a hero, others called him a liar in uniform, but no one could ignore him now. At a small-town diner, two officers sat in silence, staring at the screen above the counter. The news was on again. General Marcus Reed, wrongly cuffed by police just days ago, is now leading a federal task force on law enforcement reform. Sergeant Harlan, recently suspended, watched from his house with bloodshot eyes and drink in his hand. His badge sat on the table. "Useless now." "He humiliated us," he muttered. His wife walked in, pale-faced. "There are reporters outside. They've been there all morning." He stood furious. Let them film, let them all see. But the truth was, Harlan was scared, and he wasn't the only one. In Washington, Marcus sat at a long table in a government building. Charts, documents, and photos were spread out in front of him. He wasn't alone anymore. A team of experts, lawyers, and soldiers worked with him. Most were volunteers, veterans, lawyers. A few had faced the same kind of treatment, but never had a voice until now. Marcus held up a file. This report shows more than 1,200 confirmed cases of excessive force just last year. Most never made it past internal review. You want change? Start here. Someone asked, "You really think they'll let this happen?" He answered without blinking. "They won't have a choice." But just as he was starting to move forward, something darker began to rise. A video was uploaded online, grainy, edited, and filled with lies. It showed a younger Marcus years ago in combat overseas. Explosions, chaos. A brief moment where he pulled a gun on a civilian car that didn't stop at a checkpoint. Someone added fake subtitles. "Target all civilians, don't hesitate." The internet exploded. "He's no hero," some shouted. "Look at how he treated people overseas. Why does he deserve special treatment?" It was a smear campaign, and it was spreading fast. Marcus's phone buzzed. His assistant looked shaken. "Sir, the video's everywhere. It's fake, but people believe it." He sighed. They always go after the truth, when the lie is easier to believe. Meanwhile, inside a dark office miles away, two men watch the chaos unfold on a screen. "He's becoming too powerful," one said. "Let the noise bury him," the other replied. "He's only dangerous if people keep listening." They smiled. But what they didn't know, Marcus had already prepared for this. Back in his hotel room, Marcus sat in front of a camera. He looked straight into the lens. "No lies this time," he said softly. "Just truth." He uploaded the real footage, unedited, from his own body cam. He told the story behind it. A bomb threat, a car refusing orders to stop, and how he held fire until the last second. That civilian family lived because he hesitated. Because he chose restraint. The internet flipped again. Truth with Reed began trending. Thousands reposted his story. Veterans who served with him came forward. Even the family from the video appeared to livestream, thanking him for saving their lives. But the pressure didn't stop. That night, while walking to his car, Marcus noticed something strange. A man in a black hoodie following him, keeping his distance. Marcus stopped and turned. "Can I help you?" The man didn't speak. He just reached into his pocket. Marcus tensed, but the man pulled out a folded piece of paper and dropped it on the ground before turning and walking away. Marcus picked it up. Inside was a message written in shaky handwriting. "They're scared of you. Be careful. Not everyone wants change." Later, at a secret meeting with trusted allies, Marcus shared, "Note, it's starting," one of them said. He nodded. "The backlash always comes right before the walls fall down." The next morning, Marcus was scheduled to speak at a public event in front of the Capitol. Security was tight. Reporters lined the streets. Thousands showed up. As Marcus walked to the podium, a voice in the crowd shouted, "Why didn't you fight? Back that day? Why didn't you stop them?" He paused, then answered, "Because fighting back would have made me just another story lost in anger. But standing still? That gave the truth time to speak for itself. He looked out over the crowd. You don't change a system by burning it down. You change it by forcing it to see itself and making sure it never looks away again. The crowd erupted in applause, but deep in the shadows someone was planning something else, something much worse. A man in a suit stared at a wall filled with photos, circles drawn around Marcus's face. "This ends now," he whispered. Night had fallen over D.C., but the danger had only just begun. While General Marcus Reed rested, in a guarded hotel suite, a silent figure stood on a nearby rooftop. Dressed in black, face hidden, he peered through binoculars at the building across the street. His eyes didn't blink. His finger hovered over a small comm device. Inside a van below, another man replied in a cold voice, "Target is quiet. Just say the word." Marcus was unaware. He sat at a desk going over files again, victim reports, police complaints, names that no one had listened to before. But now those names mattered. His assistant, Ava, knocked gently and came in. "You need rest, sir." He looked up, eyes tired. "Not yet." She hesitated. "Sir, we got another message." It was slipped under the office door. Marcus opened the folded paper. "Don't go on the Sunday broadcast, they'll be watching. This time, not just with cameras." He stared at the words, then whispered, "They're making it personal." Meanwhile, at a secure military base outside, the city, an encrypted call came in. Colonel James Decker, one of Marcus's oldest allies, answered. A deep voice spoke. "He's not safe. Intel just picked up chatter. Someone high up wants him silenced." Decker frowned. "How high?" "Think cabinet-level clearance. This isn't just political anymore. It's personal." Decker's jaw tightened. "Then it's war." In cities across the country, people flooded the streets. Not with anger, but with unity. Candles were lit. Photos were held high. People of every race and background stood together. It wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about justice that had been delayed for far too long. But not everyone was quiet. In a bunker-style meeting room, the men who had threatened Ava watched the news with rage. "He blew it all open. He's turning the country. What now?" A voice in the corner growled. "We silence him for good this time." But before they could act, metal doors crashed open. Military police swarmed in. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, blackmail, and obstruction of justice," an officer said coldly. The leaders smirked. "You'll regret this. We have power." The officer stepped aside and Marcus Reed walked in. "No," he said. "You had power. Now you have nothing." Days later, Marcus stood at the steps of the Capitol, addressing the nation. Thousands listened. In silence. "I was cuffed because of my skin, not because of a crime. I was threatened not by strangers, but by men wearing the same uniform I once trusted." He paused, scanning the crowd. "But I didn't fight this war alone. I stood with brave officers, soldiers, and citizens who believed the system could change. And we did it together." The crowd erupted in cheers, tears ran down faces, children held up signs. "Thank you, General Marcus. Justice wears a uniform too." Later that evening, Marcus sat in his office alone. The battle was over, but the work had just begun. A knock on the door. It was Ava. She smiled softly. "You did it." He looked up, tired, but at peace. "No, we did it." She walked over and placed something on his desk, his old service badge, polished, shining. "You may have been cuffed," she said, "but they'll never forget the man who stood up anyway." He held the badge in his hand, and for the first time in weeks, he smiled. The sun rose slowly over the city skyline, painting the buildings gold. For many, it was just another morning. But for General Marcus Reed, it was a new beginning. After weeks of struggle, fights in courtrooms, and battles in the news, things were finally changing. Not just for him, but for the entire country. Inside a crowded press room, reporters buzzed with excitement. Cameras flashed as Marcus stepped up to the microphone. "Today marks the start of a new chapter," he said firmly. "We have passed the Justice Reform Act, a law to hold officers accountable and protect the innocent. The crowd erupted in applause. Outside, Ava watched from the sidelines, her heart full. She had been scared, broken, but now she stood with Marcus, proud and hopeful. "Do you think it will really work?" she asked quietly. Marcus smiled. "Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with brave people willing to speak up." Weeks passed. Marcus visited communities that had once feared the police. He listened to their stories, their pain, and their hopes. He met with young people who dreamed of justice and fairness. He spoke at schools about respect, courage, and unity. One evening, at a small community center, Marcus and Ava sat together. A group of children played nearby, laughing and carefree. Marcus looked at Ava. "This is why I fight. For them," she nodded. "And now they have a future to believe in." But even with progress, challenges remained. Some officers resisted change. Some leaders fought to keep old secrets hidden. Marcus knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, but he was ready. One night, as Marcus prepared to leave his office, his phone rang. It was a voice he hadn't heard in a long time. "Jedril, read," the voice said softly. "It's time." A pause. "Time for what?" Marcus asked. "To rebuild trust, together." The call was from the Pentagon's new task force, a team dedicated to continuing the fight for justice. Marcus smiled. This was only the beginning. Back home, Marcus looked at his service badge, the one Ava had given him. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a symbol of courage, of truth, of hope. Outside, the city moved forward. People walked with lighter hearts. Children played without fear, and a nation began to heal. Marcus stood at his window one last time, watching the stars. Whispered, "For every man and woman who fights for justice, this is for you.